Hey everyone, what is going on? My name's Archer Live, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing my Grimm Stoic build for Payday 2. I should preface this by saying this build is actually death sentence viable, and it actually works better the higher you go up in difficulties. It's a weird one, but I will explain it in more detail later. But it's going to be combining both the new Grimm shotguns from the update as well as the new Stoic perk deck, and try to come up with some kind of build that uses both of them and complements both of them very nicely. Now, as always, we're going to go through looking at the skills first, then go into my inventory, and then afterwards we'll go to some gameplay and talk more about the build. But I will also squeeze in an explanation about the perk deck for Stoic, because it is a weird one to get your head around, and some of you might not have had a chance to learn it yet, so I figured I'd talk you guys through it. So let's kick off by going through the skills, and then we'll go on from there. Okay, now as I've done a lot of build videos in the past, there are a lot of skills here that I don't need to give much explanation to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over every single skill that I've picked up, and then I'll just point out any ones that need discussion after that. So, in Mastermind we got Basic Combat Medic, Aced Quick Fix, Aced Uppers, Aced Inspire, Basic Forced Friendship, and Basic Stable Shot. In Enforcer, Basic Underdog, Basic Shotgun Impact, and then Aced Shotgun CQB, Far Away and Close By, Basic Overkill, and then Basic Resilience and Aced Die Hard. In Technician, we only Ace Steady Grip. In Ghost, we got Basic Duck and Cover, Ace Parkour, Ace Second Wind, Ace Low Blow, and then Basic High Value Target and Unseen Strike. And then in Fugitive, we got Basic Equilibrium, and then Ace Akimbo, 9 Lives, and Swan Song. Now, as I already said in the past, Swan Song, 9 Lives, Inspire, those kind of skills, I don't need to go over them, I don't need to discuss them. And things like the Akimbo skills will make sense because I'm bringing the Akimbo Grimms. And then also, I'm bringing crits for this build because I feel like it works really well with the Grimms because their damage isn't great. Their fire rate's really good, their ammo capacity is really good, their ammo pickup is really good, but the damage really needs some work. So having crits can help quite a lot. Other than that, let's just talk a little bit more about the other skills we picked up. So to start off with, all the shotgun skills. So bringing Akimbo Grimms to start off with as the primary, and then also bringing the Judge Shotgun as a secondary. So as a result, we only have one weapon class in this build, which means you can focus the skill points in shotguns, get them to be as powerful and as effective as we possibly can be. And also, looking at what we got here, we also got 20 extra armor on Ballistic Vest. There's a reason for that. That also connects to the fact that it gets better as you go into higher difficulties. It's all to do with the Stoic perk deck. We'll touch on that in a second. And then in Mastermind, actually getting first aid kits. Now, most of you will know I'm not a fan of first aid kits. I much prefer doctor bags because they can restore your downs, stop you from going into custody, whereas first aid kits are just a little quick fix you can get that don't restore your downs and just put your health up to max. Now, with the Stoic perk deck, again, I will explain this a little bit later on. It'll make more sense when I go over the perk deck, but for me, it works much better to constantly keep your health as high as you can, basically. And to have first aid kits, either when you're down or when you're about to be downed, it saves you having to, get down, get revived, and then die instantly. Because with Stoic, if you have a little bit of health left, you die really easily. So it's something to keep in mind and something to bear in mind. So there you go, that's something to note. But also, we brought Inspire. That's a very standard staple skill. But the rest, the common skills like Forced Friendship, Stable Shot, and then also Steady Grip, just usual small things. We don't have a lot of points and they're just quite handy skills to pick up. So that pretty much sums it up. Let's look in the weapons now. So for our primary Akimbos, as I've said, we're bringing the Brothers Grimm 12 gauge shotguns, and you wouldn't even guess how many times it took me to actually pronounce that correctly earlier when I was recording this, because it's just weird. It's like it's a tongue twister, but it shouldn't be. Either way, we brought triple O buckshot on it. We've also brought the King's Crown compensator, a concealment boost, Little Brother foregrip, LED combo gadget, and no Big Brother magazine, only because I'm trying to stay below 25 detection risk. As you saw, I aced low blow, which means that as long as I'm at 25 detection risk or under, I'll get 30% critical hit chance. So I've picked up some things that give us more damage but less concealment, and then avoided others that will, reduce my concealment. So that's why I've tried to keep it as close to but just under 25 as possible. For the secondary, as I've said, we're bringing the Judge Shotgun, and on that we're going to be bringing the triple O buckshot, King's Crown compensator, again a concealment boost, the Assault Light gadget, and no sight because, again, I'm not a fan of sights, most of you know that by now. Buzzer melee weapon, lightweight ballistic vest, we'll touch on that in a minute, as well as first aid kits. But let's look now at the perk deck and explain in a little bit more detail how this perk deck works. We're going to start off by reading all of the cards in the perk deck, and then I'll explain how it works after that. So to start with, we unlock and equip the Stoic Hip Flask. Damage taken is now reduced by 75%, the remaining damage will then be applied directly. The 75% reduced damage will be applied over a 12-second period instead, and you can use the throwable key to activate the Hip Flask and immediately negate any pending damage. This flask has a 10-second cooldown, but time remaining will be lessened by 1 second per enemy killed. After that, all of our armor is converted and applied to our health. After not taking damage for 4 seconds, any damage over time we haven't yet received and are still waiting to receive will be negated. When your health is below 35%, the cooldown of your flask will be reduced by 2 seconds for each kill rather than 1 second. And then finally, when damage over time is removed, you will be healed for an additional 50% of the damage over time remaining at that point. So to explain this very briefly, you're only taking a quarter of the damage that you would normally take, and the other 3/4 is applied over a period of time. You can stop that damage over time from happening to you as long as you either use the hip flask or stay in cover for 4 seconds and don't get shot. Either one of those will work. Obviously, staying in cover for 4 seconds means that for those 4 seconds you'll still be taking some of the damage over time, but that can still come in really handy when the flask is recharging, and you don't want to run out into a gunfight because you know it'll get you killed, rather than actually give you a chance to use the hip flask. On top of that, no matter which one you do, either stay in cover for 4 seconds or using the hip flask, you will then gain half of the health you were going to lose through the damage over time back onto your health bar again. So if, for instance, you were going to lose 100 health on the damage over time, then you use the hip flask, you wouldn't lose that 100, but you'd also gain 50 back onto your health than what you had before. It's a really handy perk deck. It isn't completely godly or overpowered, but it works really well if you can use the perk deck and master it and get really, really used to how it flows and how it works. I'm getting there slowly. I'm not perfect with the perk deck myself. I think I'm doing decent with it, but it's one of those things that just takes a lot of practice and knowing when to use the hip flask, when to run in, when to take cover, and just basically use how the perk deck works, use all those skills to your advantage and adapt to how it runs with the build. So, you know, you got to have practice basically. Now, it's worth noting that this perk deck does not grant you any bonuses to your dodge or your armor stats. As you can see from my health, I have 330 health and 0 armor. I don't get any dodge from the perk deck, and I don't get any armor boosts either. So what I thought was, well, we want to get my health to be as high as possible. Now, what I would have liked to do is go in Enforcer and go all the way up to Iron Man and get the basic skill for that to boost my health by 30%, because if we look at the stat that I'm currently at, boosting it by 30% would add on 99 health to my health bar, and that would be quite nice. I'd end up with 429 health, which is quite a bit more. It would be quite handy, but I just didn't have the skill points to do so, so instead I settled for increasing the armor of all ballistic vests by 20, which is why my health is 330 and not 310. I figured that I wanted a fast-moving character because you can go for a higher armor vest that has more of an armor stat, but it will slow you down, and I feel like this build benefits more being able to run around even though you don't have dodge. So I settled for the middleman, went for the lightweight ballistic vest. We're only losing 0.9 speed compared to the 2-piece suit, but we get an extra 50 armor compared to what we would have if we had the 2-piece suit equipped. So it's like a little middleman. It's kind of just settling for the best you can and trying to make the best of the situation. But as I've said, if you can get basic Iron Man, you work around the skills, and as always, my skills might not be perfect for you. You might not think they're right, so feel free to work it around, but I recommend if you do so, try and go for Iron Man. It's a very, very good one to bring. And as a result, we're also bringing first aid kits. As you've seen, lightweight ballistic vest. For my melee weapon, like I've said in the past, it really doesn't matter. I'd either bring the buzzer or the electrical brass knuckles because both of them can interrupt targets and make them easier to dominate. So something worth keeping in mind. But other than that, that sums up the build that I'm bringing. Pardon my English. Apparently, I can't pronounce anymore. That sums up the build. We're now going to go into some gameplay, talk a little bit more about the build, and I'm going to explain a couple of things I haven't yet talked about, such as how the first aid kits work in this build. On top of that, why I think it's better as the difficulty gets higher. So let's switch over to some gameplay and discuss the build a little bit more. The Grimm Stoic Build. Now, as I've said, there are a few things here that need discussing, a few things that the perk and the whole skill set as a whole brings to the game, and a few ways that your playstyle might change. For starters, for me, using first aid kits rather than doctor bags is a stark change. I don't like first aid kits, don't like having to use them, don't like the fact that they don't restore your downs, and I hate it when most people in a heist bring them along instead of doctor bags. That frustrates me. But for this build, the way Stoic works, where you gain health back when you're taking damage over time, if you have really low health, which you do when you're revived on Mayhem and above, then literally you have no chance to take the flask and heal health back, because even though you're only taking a quarter of the damage instantly when you are shot, you don't have much health anyway, so chances are you're going to die straight away. You might see it in the gameplay. I'm not sure whether it'll feature in the bit that I use, but there are a couple of times where I literally get revived, don't have a chance to put a first aid kit down, and you see that I die instantly. I don't have a chance to revive. So bringing Dr. Bag set would be nice, but having more meds through the first aid kits works better. So that way, if the health or the damage over time gets out of control, I can use a first aid kit to stop that and then drink the hip flask. Or if I'm revived and I need more health, use a first aid kit. It just works a lot better. And that leads me on to my other point, which is that this perk deck works better on higher difficulties. And the reasoning for that is that you're taking a lot less damage on low difficulties. So even though you're only taking a quarter of the damage instantly and 75% is over time, you'll find that you're taking so little damage on pretty much normal, even up to overkill. Overkill, you could probably make it work, but going up to like the really low difficulty, so normal, hard, very hard, overkill, you'll find you don't take much damage. So when you use the hip flask, you're not getting much health back because you weren't losing much to start with. And as a result, you'll keep taking damage, and slowly over time, it'll wear your character out because you haven't got any armor, which is something I'll touch on in a moment. And basically, as a result, you're not healing enough back, and you'll slowly find that you lose it a lot more overall than you would on Death Wish or One Down, because on Death Wish and One Down, you take a great deal of damage at one point from just any bullet at all, and then you just take the hit flask, and loads of your health comes back. So it works a lot better on Death Wish and 1 down. That's why I like this build for 1 down builds. But the problem with the Grimms is something else we're going to touch on in a minute, is that they do have a bug at the minute we'll discuss shortly. So using it in multiplayer can be a little bit frustrating. But as I said a second ago, let's just talk about the armor stat. Now, you could compare this whole perk deck and this skill set and this build as a whole to an Anarchist build, in which your health is converted into your armor to make your armor even more powerful. However, the key difference here is that in Anarchist, only some of your health is put into armor, whereas with Stoic, you have 0 armor. Every last inch of armor that you might have had gets put into your health bar. And there is a certain term, I can't quite remember the name for it, but it's the way that the armor mechanic works in this game, which is that if you have a certain amount of armor left on your character and you get shot for a damage stat that is much more than you have in armor, the extra bit of damage you're going to take gets negated, your armor breaks, and you don't take any more health damage. That might sound complicated, let me explain it in a more specific example. Let's say you have 50 armor in a heist, and you're about to get shot by a sniper. That sniper bullet does 100 damage to you. Because you have 50 armor, you lose all of your armor damage, but the extra 50 you should have taken will be negated. Your armor will break at that point, and then from there you start taking health damage. It's a little thing, I can't remember the name of the stat, but it's quite a cool little mechanic, and it's one of those things that players don't tend to notice, and I didn't really notice it until I realized in some PC patch notes a while ago that Overkill had fixed a bug for it, and they explained how the stat worked then, which I think is really cool. So having it so that you basically have a tiny little buffer chance when your armor breaks to dodge a big bullet or something like that, it works really nicely. But as a result, as you know what I'm about to say here, we don't have any armor, so that little mechanic, I suppose is the best way to describe it, that can save your backside sometimes, is gone completely. You are constantly taking damage, and there is no chance for any bullets to be negated or at least have reduced damage because of armor breaking, because your armor is just not going to break. So it's something to keep in mind and something to watch out for, and also one of the downsides of this build. And then talking about downsides, I did mention a minute ago there is an issue with the Grimm shotguns. I've mentioned this in past videos and also in some of my live streams for Payday since the DLC came out. But basically the issue is that the Grimms are currently breaking the game on Xbox One for any players who aren't using them, or even if they are, if other players using the Grimms can affect you too. Basically, it's to do with the whole pellet collision thing against the surfaces on walls and enemies. Basically, if you fire the shotguns so fast as that they're at full auto and you have about 46 rounds in the mag, as I do with the Grimms, then they're hitting the walls with such speed and velocity, the game is struggling to keep up with that. It's slowing the game down for everyone else, and basically what you end up with is either sound cutting out, sound cancelling completely and not having any sound at all in your game, and then normally that leads to the game either freezing for a few seconds, as it happened in one of my streams, or the game crashing completely, which has happened to me several times and to some of my friends at other occasions as well when I've been trying to get this build working. As far as I can tell, it doesn't happen to the person who uses the Grimms. The person who's using them themselves, if no one else is using Grimms, it's just you, you'll be fine. However, if somebody else is also using Grimms, you'll find you're both affecting each other. The glitch that we're talking about will affect the other person when you're using it, and them using the Grimms will then affect you in turn. So it's a bit of a mess, and I've heard from PS4 players that there are some sound issues when this happens, but nothing nearly as game-breaking as Xbox One. So it's mainly Xbox One players need to keep an eye out for this, but PS4, you're not completely out of the park, so do just keep aware it might happen occasionally. And as well on Xbox One, it doesn't happen to everyone. I've learned from some people that they've used the Grimms all the time, they've had people in their games using Grimms on heist after heist and not had an issue, so you might be lucky, I might just be unlucky. But it's something that's worth mentioning, at least because I've made it in this build to use the Grimms, and I want to give you all the information that stands at this point. It may be that in a future update, Overkill addresses this and fixes the bug. If they do so, I will try and put something in the description to update everyone so that they know going forward with this build. But at the minute, they're still broken, and hopefully that'll be addressed at some point. But that sums up all the cons of the build, and the pros of this build, in my opinion, are that the perk deck is extremely powerful. Being able to regenerate health just from taking damage is a really, really interesting concept. I know Overkill have executed it very well. I only wish they could have executed things like Goat Simulator a bit better when they had ideas in their head, but regardless, that's something we'll talk about another time. But I really like the way that the perk deck works. It really complements the whole style of the build that we've got here. And then also the Grimm shotguns, despite their flaws, are beautiful. The fact that they can fire so fast, they have the good ammo capacity and the ammo pickup that I've already discussed, works really well. And having the crits on the shotgun and having shotgun skills means the damage is at least somewhat respectable. And the rate you're firing them, they can kill any enemy at a rate of knots. It's ridiculous. And especially on death sentence, since now all enemies have 333% less health. And on top of that, the fact that with Overkill, when you kill an enemy, you get a 75% damage boost for 20 seconds. You're basically just melting enemies on death sentence. The only enemy as an exception is the Bulldozer, because their health was instead doubled rather than reduced. So keep an eye on Bulldozers. Sometimes you might find they down you no matter what you try to do. And that's completely fine. That's just the way they are now. They're meant to be tanks. They're not meant to be easy people you can just slap and they fall over. So keep that in mind. But all other enemies you should find die really quickly, especially with the Overkill skill working in your favor. But other than that, that pretty much sums up this build tutorial. So I do hope you guys have enjoyed it and you're going to find it beneficial. If you do use it, let me know down below what you think is good and bad about it. If you have any suggestions to how to change it, how to improve it, feel free to leave comments down below as well, as long as they are respectful, and don't say that I'm an absolute moron for picking something up, because occasionally people have done that and it's like, yeah, I know what you're saying, but you could be a bit more polite. So always be respectful of everyone else in the comments, but you guys normally are, so I'm glad about that. Please keep that up. You guys have been a really good community, so let's keep that up. Let's keep all the positive discussions going. But as always, I'm going to be looking down the comment section below. I try and read every comment. I have missed a few recently, but I'm trying to read as many comments as physically possible. So if you leave something, chances are I'll see it and reply to you. But other than that, thank you all very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up. It's always very much appreciated. And if you'd like to stick around for more videos, then consider subscribing. It's always free and it's always very, very much appreciated. So thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take it easy.